Welcome to the Peak Performance Podcast, your guide to optimizing your life one health tip at a time. This podcast is designed to entertain and inform, not to provide medical or health advice. Always consult your doctor when it comes to your personal health or before you make any changes to your diet, exercise, or lifestyle.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Peak Performance Podcast. I'm Coach Kyle.
And I'm Dr. K. Thank you guys for joining us today as we discuss nicotine, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're going to talk about its benefits, its bad things about it, and then where to get it, how to take it. Let's get into it.
Yeah, let's jump on in. So, Dr. K, what do you know about nicotine?
Nothing. Literally nothing.
That was me with the high dose vitamin C episode. I was like, I'm stretching. So this is why we're such a great duo, because our gaps in knowledge kind of fill each other.
Yeah, it's actually interesting how that works.
Yeah. It helps that you have the more of the medical background. I have more of the biohacker, sketchy background.
Pretty much. Yeah, nicotine's not you prescribed. They don't teach about it in medical school, so I never really learned much about it except basically what you've told me.
Yeah. Have you ever used it?
No.
Oh. You straight edge folks. Yeah, so nicotine. I'm sure you have heard nicotine is an addictive chemical. Please take with caution. It's on every like commercial, everything that has nicotine on it. It has to say from the FDA, nicotine is an addictive chemical. So they're not lying. Nicotine is addictive. So we're going to go ahead and start with the downsides because I don't want to oversell nicotine because it's not for everybody and everybody shouldn't just run out and start taking nicotine. So we're going to go through the downsides first. And number one, it is very addictive. So this can be mitigated in a series of ways, and we'll talk about that later on how to dose. But the younger you are, south of 25, the more chance that nicotine is going to have a very addictive effect on your brain. So your brain is not done developing under 25. And when you take nicotine, it rewires those dopamine pathways. It rewires your brain, and you're much more likely to become addicted and very heavily addicted to it. So first things first, downside, if you are under 25, do not use nicotine. Just wait. It is not recommended for anybody under 25 ever. There's really no use case for it because it'll rewire your brain. So that being said, this is still actually a huge problem in the U.S. I was just listening to an Andrew Huberman podcast. He was talking with an expert who works in schools, working on actually kids with issues with nicotine and cannabis. And they are estimating that the usage of high school kids of nicotine or cannabis vape pens is somewhere around 40 to 60% of all people in high school.
Wow.
It's crazy. So that just goes to show you the power of this molecule when taken in the wrong way and the wrong time, and specifically south of 25 years old. So being addictive is number one. And if you're over 25, I'm not saying you can't be addicted. There are plenty of people who are addicted over 25. It's just more likely that you will not get addicted. Moving on, other downsides is it raises your blood pressure. So it's a vasoconstrictor, which means it tightens your blood vessels. So if you have a high blood pressure problem, if you're on lowering medications, nicotine is not for you. Don't do it. Because if you're already struggling with it, your kidneys do not need another kick and another jolt of high blood pressure, especially one that's going to be activated a few times a day if you're dosing a few times a day. So high blood pressure means no go for nicotine. The last main negative is most of the delivery methods that nicotine comes in. So I think by now we all know that cigarettes are bad, hopefully. If we don't know that, maybe we need to start listening a little bit. Vapes are not a good replacement. They're not a good trade-off. There's an argument being made right now whether vapes are as linked to cancer as cigarettes, and it's looking like they are, but probably not quite as bad. But the thing that vapes have that cigarettes don't are, because of the chemicals and the actual vapor of the water, not the smoke, it actually has a much faster absorption time, and it gets to your brain almost instantaneously. So they've shown that nicotine vapes light up your brain almost identically to cocaine.
Wow.
Because of how fast that signal is from your mouth to your brain. Whereas it has to go through your lungs and be absorbed in the smoke. But when it's just that vapor, it can almost instantly go right to your brain. So it's actually worse from a brain perspective than cigarettes, but probably slightly better for cancer. But the jury's still out. We have decades of data on cigarettes and very little on vapes.
Vapes cause this one thing called lipid-laden pneumonia. Have you heard of that?
I have, yeah.
It's a particularly nasty type of pneumonia that's ridiculously hard to treat, and everyone that gets it pretty much ends up in the ICU. Some of the chemical compounds in the vapes, they cause lung irritation, but in a way that basically the lungs send fat particles, or fat particles accumulate in the lungs, and then that leads to infections. But you can't just treat it with regular antibiotics. You basically have to be in the ICU on oxygen, waiting for these fat particles to dissolve.
And while you're probably detoxing the substance that you were addicted to.
Yep.
Yeah, that's not fun. So we're seeing that. We're seeing lung collapses, like full-on lung collapses from vapes. It's not a good trade-off at all. So that's the downsides. Any questions for me, Dr. K? Did I cover most of everything?
So you've talked about it's addictive, and then you've talked about why vapes are bad, but what if I was to take nicotine gum or nicotine patches? Are those as bad?
No, is the answer. They're not as bad. It depends. So some brands, this is where it gets a little finicky, right? So there's a few ways to take nicotine that are beneficial. So probably patches and lozenges and gum are the best ways to do it. Maybe a spray. You can't get the spray in the U.S. though. Nicorette spray, they don't sell it in the U.S. It's only in Canada. So the patches, the lozenges, the gum, those are by far the best delivery methods. But even then, I like to be really careful. So I don't like to go to the gas station and just pick up a tub of Zen or whatever. Like all the reels online on the Zen. Those are hilarious. They get me. I use Lucy. So Lucy's very pointed in making sure that their ingredients are clean. And I've looked through their ingredients. They don't use aspartame. They don't use a lot of the random chemicals. They still have some chemicals in it. It's not ultra clean, but I think it is one of the best on the market. So they sell breakers, what they call little pouches with flavor sacks in them, gum, and lozenges. So that's the delivery method I would choose.
The other option for gum is Nicorette unwaxed, unflavored. So it probably tastes disgusting and has the horrible texture, but it has basically nothing in it except nicotine and whatever plastic they make gum out of.
Yeah. So, yeah, it doesn't taste good because nicotine does not taste good. It is an alkaloid. And generally, when you think of alkaloids, you think of bitter, extremely bitter, caustic tasting.
So, one of my patients told me she'll take a stick of the Nicorette gum and then a stick of regular gum and chew them together. So she gets normal flavor and then also the cleanest nicotine you could get.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, if we're going to go for the purist, I honestly think the spray is the number one. But you just can't get it here. So, because it's literally a spray of pharmaceutical nicotine. That's what it is.
Let's road trip to Canada.
So pick up a box of nicotine and drive it back down. Yeah. So, benefits. Why would you consider going to get a Lucy lozenge or a nicotine spray from Canada? The benefits are actually pretty wide-ranging. So, we'll start out with most common benefits, and then we'll end at just most strange benefits. Most common is helps your metabolism and helps your satiety. So you'll see, if someone's been smoking for a while and they quit smoking, they usually gain a bunch of weight. And the reason for that is the nicotine in the cigarettes that they're smoking actually has a metabolism boosting effect. So it uncouples mitochondria, which lets you basically burn some fat. That's a hyper simplified version. And it also sends a signal to the liver to release glucose into the bloodstream, which makes you feel like you're full and you don't need to eat. So here, this could be very helpful for, when you're trying to lose weight. So if you're trying to lose weight and it does two things, it speeds up your metabolism while making you feel fuller. That's pretty impressive. So this would be a good thing to add to a stack while you're cutting down.
But this does not replace Ozempic. It's 1/50th the strength of Ozempic. This
would be something that you might want to throw in on your last day of your Ozempic week because the Ozempic's starting to wear off. That's how you could use this, kind of incorporated smartly into an Ozempic protocol. Which, if we haven't done it, I think we've talked about GLP-1s, but we really should do a full episode on GLP-1s.
Yeah.
That'd be good. Okay, so metabolism, satiety. It is a known cognitive booster. So it is. It makes you feel a little sharper. So it's interesting because it's kind of adaptive. So for some people, nicotine will take you down a little bit in energy if you're too high, and if you're too low, it'll take you up in energy. So it's kind of adaptive in terms of how the body responds to it. And some people respond well and some people don't. But for the most part, if you're down on, like if you're kind of feeling brain foggy, it will give you that cognitive boost, that mental clarity, help you be productive. This is the classic writer's stack. You get a nicotine toothpick and a cup of coffee, and writers can just pound out a book. It's really getting that creativity and that brain power going. Next is it seems, and this is early, but it seems to be in some way a longevity molecule. So Dr. Stephen Gundry, we'll link to him below. In his book, he talks about the country of Andorra. Andorra is like the tiny little country between Spain and France. And they were not mentioned in the blue zones, but they have comparable lifespan to the blue zone people. And he believes the reason they weren't mentioned is because of their diet, which includes a lot of sausage and cigarettes. So it does not fit the blue zone narrative, if you will. But
You have to wonder, are there cigarettes, local grown tobacco and hand rolled cigarettes, or is it commercially made garbage?
so I don't know actually off the top of my head what they are, but I do know that he did have a solution as to why the cigarettes weren't killing them from cancer. So their diet, basically the way they eat was super high in vitamin C, and it was dosed like all the time regularly. And so that kind of counteracted the cancerous effect of the cigarettes. And so you saw what was interesting in this population. You saw the men live longer than the women, which is almost always the other way around. And the men were heavier smokers. And so that was kind of the main correlation they drew. So it's too early to 100% tell, but people think that nicotine could have a longevity benefit. Now, I would love to see this kind of thing replicated on a scale of, having a healthy delivery mechanism of it, and, a random controlled trial of, a lot of people being on nicotine and off nicotine, but we probably won't get that because the money just isn't there.
Makes sense.
So that's the longevity benefit. And then to arrive at our most wild and out there benefit. So actually, it's kind of a two-part. It has been shown to help people with something that rhymes with vovid. So people who have the long-acting version of this very popular infirmity, often their visual cortex or their kind of hearing, taste, smell areas go off of it. But this is where nicotine actually has been shown to kind of alleviate those things. So a dose of, I think they did the study on the dose of a patch. I think it was a 14 milligram or 7 milligram patch, and they saw impressive improvements in the symptoms from having long COVID. And then lastly, the weird thing with nicotine is a lot of pesticides that we use nowadays. So you've heard of glyphosate, but a lot of them now have venoms of animals, like a cone snail, or specific venoms that are toxic to everyone, but we use them in low amounts and they're toxic to bugs on plants. Turns out when we eat the food that these pesticides are sprayed onto, these venoms go into us and cause problems, all kinds of problems. But what it does is it binds to the nicotinamide receptor. So when you take nicotine, it actually clears out these animal venoms from your system. And so this is kind of the link to COVID-19. They're thinking that if someone has a lot of these animal venoms, it sets them up for the COVID-19 to be more active because they're immunosuppressed. So taking nicotine will clear those receptors, therefore allowing your body to fight the COVID-19 more effectively. That's my farthest out benefit of nicotine.
Okay. So nicotine ranges from, I'm going to feel a little better and eat less, all the way up to protect you from crazy pesticides.
Yep.
That's a pretty good thing right there.
It is. So like what I tell people, and this is very important because it is addictive. So like you want to dose it on a schedule where you're very likely to not get addicted. So what that looks like for most people is every other day maximum. So if you do it every day, you're most likely going to work towards addiction. That makes sense. If you do it every other day, nicotine has such a short half-life, you're basically 100% cleared out within 12 to 14 hours. And so you have basically an entire 24 hours without it, kind of resetting to some degree. So the ultimate protocol to not get addicted is every other day dosing with 1 week off a month. So the every other day makes sure that you don't actually get addicted. The week off a month resets your tolerance. So you can go back to basically feeling how you did on the original dose every month. So that's how I would dose it. And then in terms of milligrams, so it really depends. Some products you can get 2, some products you can get 4. If you've never tried it, I recommend starting out very low. Get the 2 milligram gum and bite off a quarter of it. So you're having half a milligram. Because if you go too high, you will be spinning, you will be nauseous, you will be hot. You'll be like, what is happening? This is the worst.
Fair enough.
You don't want to do that. So I would start with half or a quarter of a 2 milligram piece of gum and then work your way up from there. Usually you don't want to really go over 12 milligrams a day, 10 milligrams a day. I try not to go over 16 just because I really like it. It's probably not where I should be optimally, but
you don't always feel optimal. Sometimes you just do feel better.
Yeah, that's true. I'm a biohacker, so I'm really good at coaching people, but not always with myself.
Do as I said.
Yes. Yeah. So, 10, 12 milligrams. Now, if you're older, you can definitely go up on that number. So the older you get and the more likely you're experiencing cognitive decline, you can go up on that number. So if you're fighting something like Alzheimer's, you definitely can jack that number up to help slow down those effects. Did I miss anything? Well, you got any questions for me that other people might have I can answer?
I really can't think of any. You covered dosing and how to take it. You covered why to take it. You covered why not to take it. I think that's about the full circle on it.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Nicotine on the Peak Performance Podcast. I'm Coach Kyle. You can find me at Toxin Free Kyle on Instagram.
And I'm Dr. K, or the OsteoDoc. And thank you guys for joining us and listening to Coach Kyle basically talk to himself for 20 minutes about nicotine. We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Peak Performance Podcast, your #1 resource for today's top health hacks and facts. You can follow us on Instagram at the Peak Performance Pod or on X at Peak Perform Pod. You can also check out our website and weekly blogs at peakperformancepodcast.online. Again, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. We put out a new podcast every Thursday. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended for the purposes of diagnosing, treating, curing, or preventing any disease. Before using any products referenced on the podcast, consult with your healthcare provider, carefully read all labels, and heed all directions and cautions that accompany the product. Information found or received through the podcast should not be used in place of a consultation or advice from a healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem or should you have any healthcare questions, please promptly call or see your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Coach Kyle, Dr. K, and producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of the information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein.